The lights in the control room continued to stay alight, as the group had gone through every file of Wu they could find. It had been so quiet during their time in the research center that they were almost certain at a few points that they were not alone. But they could not be bothered with that right now. Now they had a few pieces to their ever-growing puzzle of current events. For so long, Claire had thought Henry Wu had died at the explosion at Lockwood Estate. In the year that had followed that frenzied and quite frankly nonsensical fiasco, Claire had given the young girl Maisie to some of Lockwood's living relatives, knowing that she was not exactly fit to take care of children herself. There was plenty of evidence to back up this claim. Main subject: June 11th, 2015. For Claire's sake, however, I, the author, will not be bringing these events up. Focusing on the now, the latest of the audio logs had been taken out of the machine as the group contemplated what they knew so far. Grant was the first to speak. That was interesting. If by interesting you mean, absolutely horrific, then yeah, Malcolm replied as he leaned back. So we know that he bombed the place after the Lockwood incident, Zia said. But the question is, why would he do that? No good ever comes from the use of nuclear warfare, Maxon folded his arms. We can all agree on that, Grant said. I remember when I first went to the first park. Wu was the head geneticist. Didn't he work at the second park with you, Claire? He did. It was an understatement for Claire to say that she was shocked by what the recordings had revealed to her and her party. She had been partners with him since Masrani first opened the park to the public. He told her that he wished to succeed in his research greater than any InGen scientist before him. He wished to even surpass John Hammond's in his success. Always going on about the fragility of life and how his studies had proven the DNA theory compatible to dinosaurs. Henry sought out to make a name for himself after the death of Hammond. Claire could remember that he was one of the last people John Hammond had spoken to before his death, so long ago. He never told her the words that he told him. All that he told her was that the world was about to meet the dawning of something big. Of course, she knew it had something to do with the second park, but never in her long life of InGen business affairs could she have guessed this was his plan all along. Darn you, Henry, she thought. She now thought of his name in ways not fit to speak. Hey, I found another log, Franklin spoke up, holding up one more tape. On it, there was a date that read 03-16-2020. Out of all the files they had found, this one seemed the most recent. Put it in, Sattler said to him as he complied with her request. He placed the tape into the machine and pressed the button to start it. Soon, Henry's face appeared again, and the recording played. 16th of March, 2020. I didn't even think I would get this far in my venture. It had been so long since I began my dealings in Aerocol Labs. My workers have been working non-stop to perfect my simple idea. To those watching this, I cannot stress enough the importance of keeping it secret. For these experiments will change the world as we know it. Once, John Hammond had a dream of reaching far beyond the confines of modern technology. Unfortunately, he lacked the pure intelligence required for such an achievement. He could never even begin to see what could be possible at just the filling of a simple DNA gap. Nobody could ever understand what it was InGen should have truly stood for. Not some theme park for the weak-minded, but a mold that will become what will be the new world. Something to show the entire world that mankind has been too forgiving to science. No one but my scientists are aware of what has truly happened since the fall of Jurassic World. When I heard that bison and manticore had risen again to scout out Site B, I became curious. I found that they had struck a blow against InGen and got away with it scot-free. InGen never suspected anything. When bison left the island as a smoldering mess, they never came back. Someone had to tend to it. I had just returned from rechecking the island myself. I had surveyed my geneticists on their current duties. You see, the world knows velociraptors to be virtually extinct. Who am I to tell them that they are wrong? While that statement is correct, it is at the same time false. For my first test subjects, I had to create something that Masrani never authorized. What my associates call smaller raptors, I call them by their true given name. Pyroraptor olympius, first found in Provence, France, and a subspecies of velociraptor. Seeing as how both hybrid experiments I had created were unfortunately sundered, my newest experiment has thus far proven far more reliable. Thanks to the inadvertent help of a one Howard Silas King, our research has spiked, and my experiment has been perfected. A chemical capable of taking control of the host's mind and increasing their aggression. At least 36 of these Pyroraptors have been created under my jurisdiction and have been given the remains of Sorna to become their hunting grounds. And they have been the most viable test subjects for my chemical. I have chosen to call this new experiment Hirasim, and now I have only to tip off my soon-to-be friends at Biosyn and let them have a dose of the action. The Derrickal Labs will be open for public business, and we would... As the whole speech spoken by the Asian scientist carried on, suddenly it started to glitch out. The screen had become static and turned back to normal in around 1.2 seconds flat. No one could get a word in as to what was happening in the video currently. "What's happening?" Claire asked. "Video looks like it's being overlapped by something," Z observed. "Let me see if I can do something." Franklin tried to fiddle with the controls, but was interrupted by something. Wu's voice. His face had appeared clearly on the screen again, but this time, there was something different. He wasn't in his normal office like in the past videos. He was in some sort of odd-looking laboratory, and there seemed to be some other people in the background, viewing papers and tending to various machines. Brilliant idea, in my opinion. Something not one had ever hoped to achieve, no matter how hard they tried. They lacked the actual truth to success for this world, but I have gone too far into that already. For those of you still listening to this tape, I wish to say this. There is a choice within my head that tells me that I should let you live, that I should allow you to carry on with your lives, but the rest of my mind tells a different option. It tells me the honest truth. If I let you escape this abandoned utopia, if I let you live, then my sacrifices, my entire work, will be for nothing. Years of research destroyed, but I do not need to go into these details, seeing as how you yourself know how important it is to protect your work. Don't you, Claire? You and I have been working together since the fall of the first park. I've known you for your entire run with InGen. You've helped me, and so I have helped you with your experiments. The least I could do is a little bit of gratitude. You gave me the requirements needed for the Indominus Rex. This is what makes this all the more painful to do. The hounds are en route to your location. Goodbye, Claire. As Claire sat there, in fear of knowing that this was not a past recording, the Video.Guru turned to one of the scientists behind him. Cut the power off. With those words being said, the light suddenly cut off. Claire yet let out a yell of fright as everyone turned around, as they were now shrouded in darkness. Only the light of the outside sun from the windows brought light to them. Maxon looked outside of one of them and scanned the area. He then ducked back down to them with a look of strongly hidden fear. They're coming. We've got to get out of here, Grant said seriously. The group then turned to quickly exit the door to take their chances of running to the front doors. Their optimism was swiftly shattered as they heard footsteps outside. They knew that these hounds that Wu had mentioned were right outside. They even heard some snarling, almost like a velociraptor, but with a good bit of hyena in there. This way, Claire sharply whispered to the group. They followed her swiftly down the hall, the sound of scratching on the doors outside catching their ears. Claire then stopped at a circular chute of some sorts. Garbage chute. One at a time. Go! Claire opened the door to the chute and had Grant go first. He slid down the chute and into more darkness. Then Ian, then Zia, Ellie, Franklin, Maxon. Once everyone else was down the chute and to the lower levels, Claire opened the door wider and got ready to slide down. The sound of crashing in the halls they were just in sent chills down her spine. She knew the hounds were in the building. They had to have caught their scent. They had to have been tracking them down. She saw a metal bar in the side of the chute and let go of the door slightly. She held onto the vat and found a latch on the inside of the door. She closed the hatch and let go of the bar. Sliding it down into darkness was not something that she had in mind when venturing to Sorna, but now this was something that seemed like the everyday for her. Once she felt herself land on something, she knew she had reached the bottom. Ancient, charred rubbish. That was what she had landed on. She quickly got to her feet and looked around. The lower levels were far more darker than the floors above her. She could not see where her companions had gone, but she was comforted by the fact that the stairs to the power levels were demolished, so the hounds had no way of coming down there now. Suddenly a white light flashed in her face, causing her to flinch. She turned and saw Grant standing there with his flashlight and his hand extended to her. He helped her out of the compactor and into the room where the others stood around them. Sure is quiet down here, Franklin observed as he flashed his light around the room. Shelves were stacked everywhere with loads of old equipment. Large glass tubes stood in various parts of the room. Within them were what appeared to be small animals floating in the small water within. Scattered on the floor were pieces of eggshell collecting dust and cobwebs. This must be where they started making them. Sattler looked around. I thought all the tubes were on the upper levels. Grant scratched his beard. That's where they were when I was here. Ingen had a lot of secrets. Claire shined her light around the room. Looking at all the things on the shelves, she had to say something. Jeez, I didn't know they had these kind of samples. What samples? Malcolm asked. Imagine a dragonfly, Claire said as she held a small glass container, its label no longer reading describable words. Small, predatory insects with wings that move almost as fast as a hummingbird. Found mostly near swampy areas or lake shores. Now, imagine one from prehistoric times, 2 feet in wingspan. The size of a modern-day macaw. Meganura mani. The longest recorded flying insect. I remember Miss Browning considered making some with hopes of making an insectarium for Jurassic World. He issued a request by the geneticist to begin work on such an animal. However, they said that they had to gather some 2,000 specimens of dragonfly DNA to test it. The last time we used the supercomputers necessary for this creature was for the Dilophosaurus, and that time it nearly shut down all of our laboratories. Well, it looked like it worked. Maxon examined one of the larger tubes, and it looks like they were making a good many other things as well. Look at these specimens. I already knew InGen was a shifty company, but I never knew they had an actual underground. Among the specimens inside the tube, Zia had found only one that she could classify. I know this one. Cryolophosaurus ellioti, early Jurassic era, found in Argentina. I can tell by the bone structures. Back before I joined the DPG, I used to study dino bone structures at the Natural Science Museum in Ontario. Yeah, I was just gonna call it a dinosaur, Franklin stammered. They told me they failed to create the Cryolophosaurus. Quite frankly, Claire was surprised to see how many specimens were made here, and how they were abandoned as if they were nothing. But after viewing Henry's audio logs, she had almost forgotten the elephant in the room. The main reason they had gone down to this floor in the first place. Wu knew they were there. Grant stood in front of one of the tubes as he faced the others. There must be a door around here somewhere. There has to be a way to get out of here without those hounds of Wu's finding us. Better look around the back. Must be something else.
Hey folks, viewer mail time again. Oh, here's one from Sally, age 14. Dear Pig, aren't you interrupting the story at the most suspenseful part? Well, the answer is yes, Sally. Yes, I am. Keep those cards and letters coming.
It had happened so fast. The shape of an animal had lunged from the darkness and directly rammed Grant to the ground. The lights of everyone's flashlight showed a gleaming reflection on the animal's claws as they dug into Grant's shoulder. They saw the animal's jaws closed around his neck. Its growling was coupled with Grant's yells of pain as his jacket was becoming red with his blood. Claire looked around frantically before her eyes befell a large wrench. She picked it up off its shelf and ran towards Grant. She swung the wrench hard and knocked the animal off of him, sending it into the shelves. Sattler quickly rushed over to him and helped him to his feet. He had a large gash on his neck from where the creature had bitten into him. It did not look fatal, but it needed some attention soon. Zia helped Sattler with Grant and examined the injury. You doing okay, Grant? Walk in the park, Zia. Grant huffed in pain. Maxon had found a few medical packs and antiseptic among the many shelves and rushed over to Grant. After handing them over to Zia, he raised his flashlight to see what it was that had attacked him. It was a dinosaur, of course, but unlike any that the group had ever seen before. The creature stood at 4 feet tall, its claws and fangs soaked with Grant's blood. On top of its feet, there was one claw that stood upright. It was indeed a raptor, but a strange one at that. On a body that would be all scaly and hard, this one bore feathers of fiery orange. And just like the larger dinosaurs which are causing problems back on the mainland, its eyes were completely white. The Pyroraptor stood there with its mouth agape. It growled as it showed its blood-soaked fangs. Its red-painted claws flexed in anticipation as its left sickle claw tapped on the ground as it stared at them in blind fury. It craned its neck in animalistic hostility as it snarled at them. Some of its growling sounded like that of a hyena. Malcolm turned and tried to find a way for him and the others to escape, but he stopped as his hopes were smashed. Standing before him down the aisles of shelves was another Pyroraptor, and it was joined by a third, and a fourth, a fifth. Pretty soon there were about 30 of these fiery raptors around them, and all of them had eyes of glowing white, glowing like angels of death in the dark, and mouths full of fangs, preparing to slice through their flesh. Their feathers all ruffled due to their wild and savage nature. Max could only imagine the mess that their deaths would make, since there were so many of these animals about. There there was no way out. God help us. Suddenly, Claire noticed a door that led into the main halls of the lower levels, and there were no pyros around it. If they could make it there, then maybe, just maybe, they could make it out. "Follow me!" she yelled as she raced towards the door. She heard her allies following suit, Zia and Sattler helping Grant along as he panted heavily, his injuries still hurting. Just as the rest of her team, Claire ran as fast as her legs could take her down the dark hallways. She was thankful that she was not wearing those shoes again. She had such a pain in her ankle after that. Fleeing from a T-Rex in heels was an athletic event in itself. The heck with a track. If they could make it out of these hallways alive, then the plan was simple. They would hightail it for the boat and get the heck off this island and never come back. They should have never even come here to begin with. She could hear the tapping of claws behind them. She knew the pyros were in pursuit. The growling and laughter-like snarls filled their ears. If God had smiled on them, if they were allowed to escape with their lives, then they would expose Wu and Byasin for their horrible crimes. But all of this thinking had distracted her from what was happening behind them. She could not hear Zia asking Maxon to take over helping Sattler with Grant, while she grabbed something for her jacket. She had failed to see her, Malcolm, and Franklin falling behind. If she knew that this was the last time she would see one of the three alive, she would have thought of something better to say.